Hi, Grace.
Hi, Abby.
We were just talking about the phenomenon of the anti-racist reading list.
Correct. We wanted to talk a little bit around race and books because that is our ever present milieu.
True.
And I think, first of all, I just want to say that we're going to need to keep talking about this. So if you're not into it, you should just leave. And I
If you're
think
not into books, why are you here?
I think part of the current discussion is about, what is our role in the world? How can we, as readers, as book lovers, be good allies in this fight against racism? And, I don't think we have the definitive answer, but I think we need to be just like engaging with it and actively like making sense together of what this means. And particularly, I think it's important in any discussion about race, right, that we are, making sure that we center Black voices and that we listen to Black women, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in that spirit, you and I have been glued to the internet, and there are two articles that have come out fairly recently, amongst many, that we specifically want to talk about. One is called Why Performative Allyship Can Be Deadly. I think that's it. I might have gotten it wrong. So. I will put the exact title in the description box. By Holly Phillips. And the other one is called What is an Anti-Racist Reading List For? By Lauren Michelle Jackson. I will link them both below. And I think that taken together, if you haven't read them, you should read them. And taken together, I think they really allow us to sort of talk about race and books in an important way. So that's what we're talking about today. I think you've read them both as well, so we can just sort of talk about like the central arguments in the articles. So I think first the frame of performative allyship, right? So Holly Phillips is sort of talking about, what we've seen sort of happen in the virtual world and social media, where everyone's sort of, well, not everyone, but many people are making their position known, right, in support of Black lives, and that can come in various forms. But that we need to be careful about, or that we need to interrogate if our allyship is performative or authentic. And she gives, a few tips or suggestions that can help us sort of check our own motives, knowing that no one is free from complicity, right? And talks about what we can actually do, like tangible actions that show real allyship, okay? And then the other piece about the anti-racist reading list is talking about this sort of knee-jerk tendency that many people sort of in the literati or in the book community have around saying, what can we do? We must learn more about this. Let's list some books that can teach us, right? Predominantly written by Black people over many years, that are suddenly really hot right now and selling out.
Yeah.
So I think what we're saying, and I'm sorry, I do want to hear you, is that the reading list, right, that the act of like putting forth an anti-racist reading list can be an act of performative allyship or authentic allyship. And how do we know the difference, I guess, is maybe what we want to talk about today. Or
I think, you and I would identify books as a profound source of, making sense of the world, of moral guidance, of, correcting the holes in our, education. So the power of the reading is not necessarily disputable. So, it does make sense to want to share those books with people. But I think your point about like there are tangible actions you can be doing, and you don't necessarily is it critical in this moment that you have to have developed like a bibliography to ground your philosophy, or can you just like do what people are asking you to do? Like, can you be there for the community even if you don't have your like thesis statement? You know, that's sort of a question about the performance of like a, you know, I guess that sense of like, oh, race is going on, I better like read a book, you know.
Right. That maybe that's not, that's like a good thought to have, but it's maybe not sufficient in and of itself, right? So I think there's a couple stages to the reading about race, right? I think what Dr. Jackson notes is sort of about like the timing of one's individual wake-up call, right? And when that coincides with, oh, I guess I need to learn something about it, that maybe an important reflection is, why now? Like, why are you suddenly awake? And if you now recognize that there are holes in your reading, and that is something that you can do for your own growth and personal edification, to also consider, why haven't you been doing the reading up until now?
Yeah.
Right? And that's not something that you necessarily need to like share with the world, but maybe is an important question, and gets you to think about things like formal education in the United States, or, you know, what your family, you know, passed down to you, or how, you know, like works by Black authors like consistently are marginalized and like pushed to the side, and it's only now that they sort of have like, you know, maybe a temporary moment, right? But that doesn't like preclude you now from like doing the reading, like, and I think she makes that point pretty clearly, like the reading still must be done. And so, you know, making the list or finding and following a list that somebody else has, you know, put some thought into, that's a great thing to do.
And we had a friend ask us to like put together some book, like a book package, and it was fun. Like, I mean, I think it was like a joyful task to do, because, you know, we kind of like went through and thought about all these books we loved, and in doing so sort of also started talking about the fact that, you know, some of these are just like the greatest writings in the country, you know, like it's almost strange that, we're talking about these are virtuous things to undertake, when it's like, well,
it's not a hardship.
Like good ass reading.
Or, it's not a duty. Like, you're not, you know, like it's a privilege to be able to experience, you know, some of like the greatest works, not only in terms of, you know, their individual disciplines of expertise, but like certainly within the fiction world, just like masterful works of literature, like great pieces of art, right? And so it shouldn't just be like, well, I guess now's the time to read a book by a Black person, right? It's more like
that's an always food.
Yes. like and maybe should be reversed. Like, yeah,
like maybe like get some whites out of the canon.
Yeah.
Like topple the statues of the canon. Right. Anyway, not but yeah, we, you know, what's the next step of how are you going to read these? Who are you going to talk about them with? Where are you going to, if you don't understand something, where are you going to go to learn more about it?
Yeah.
That it really, you know, it is an education. I mean, I think like I was lucky that my education really did focus on texts like these, but not everyone's did, and you won't necessarily understand everything or have the context for it.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, when we sort of gathered a few books for our friend, you know, one of the considerations was sort of like scaffolding or considering what is, you know, a good introduction versus what might be a little bit more advanced. So I think, and that's another point that's sort of in the article about how, you know, in a reading list, everything's like equivalent to everything else. And it can be hard to, make sense of like where to go, and that and to recognize that while we are all free to read whatever we would like to read, not everything is written like targeted just for you, right?
You're not the target audience.
Yeah, and that there might be a little bit more homework you need to do, or reading up in the same way that many of us here research, to the nth degree, everything we might possibly read, that the same is true for, Black literature or, nonfiction works by Black authors, that it's just because it has a Black writer doesn't mean that it's like, I don't know, like equally open for your consumption, I guess.
Right.
There is some.
Yeah. And I was just thinking too about like I think ours, I have seen some lists where it was like, here's your starter kit and and we kind of thought about that too, but not necessarily in the sense of like the beginning or the first text we wanted were like less radical or even less academic, but I think like things we considered foundational and just highly readable to a degree, but suitably, I think, intense. I think we picked things that were like not likely to let a reader off the hook. I don't think any of a white or a non-Black reader, I should say. I don't think any of the books do that necessarily, but I do think sometimes that's a concern people have. Like, we got to start like gently, but really, that's not what we're getting into.
Yeah. So, I would be curious what other people's thoughts are about this, but just to say that, in the same way that we work our way up in many respects when we're trying a new genre or when we're trying to read classics or, that the same, I think, applies here. That it's not just like, it's weird to say, because it's like, it is a free-for-all, but it's not a free-for-all, kind of.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk specifically about making recommendations in this medium, because, there's what we do in our private lives with our friends, and, like that it's never recorded on camera. But I think book recommendations on YouTube carry a particular weight, and that they are the kind of currency or, the lingua franca of the community. And, you often hear people say, oh, I got this book based on so-and-so's recommendation, or I don't remember where I heard about it, but, this person talked about it in such a way that really made me want to seek it out. And so I think we should be careful with the privilege that affords us, right? And that, on the one hand, I think people can be maybe overly concerned or like afraid of kind of getting it wrong. And this question of virtue signaling, I think, is coming up a lot with, non-Black creators on the platform. And, I was thinking about it as well for myself. I was like, well, should I make a recommendations video? I mean, that seems like something that I can do with what I have now. And I think when we talk about like what is the least we can be doing right now, or what is available to us, that we should all consider doing something like that, because we know that the community values it. And this like question or concern about virtue signaling, I think, is important for us to sort of have with ourselves, right? Like, examine your motivations for doing something like that, and is it just so you can sort of ease your own discomfort and feel like you are checking the ally box, right? That is something to look at. But if you are just worried about how other people might perceive you, I think we need to let that go.
Yeah, like, do what you can when you can, and accept that some people might be put off by it,
right?
And like
do it
deal
anyway.
With it, just like let that go.
Yes, and part of sort of embracing that discomfort, like,
as long as you're not doing harm,
how we are engaging in allyship, right?
Yeah.
And moving beyond that, there are other things that I think is particularly pertinent to the book community, right? So back to the piece on performative allyship, she talks about what is one way you can make sure you're moving beyond that? And we're talking about like redistribution and like using your funds, right? Like sort of voting with your dollar. And I think that that is actually a great thing that is available to book lovers everywhere, right? And if for certain economic reasons, like the actual dollars aren't there, you know, you can vote with your library card, or, you know, there are a lot of free downloads available, or you can read essays or things like that. But for most of us who are privileged enough to engage in this hobby, we have some disposable income that we choose to spend on books. So you know, going beyond just making some recommendations, like to consider for yourself, you know, like just
where am I buying from?
Yeah,
don't buy from Amazon.
Bookstore.
Yeah.
Like, you know, buy from, you know, a small press that is, you know, lifting up Black authors. You know, go to a virtual event, buy a Black author. You know, pre-order, like look through releases for deal. Black authors during this time and pre-order, right? Like these are all things that we do anyway, and that I guess could fall in the bucket of like do involve some sacrifice, but like really like shouldn't be. Then that can be a way, I think, of bringing the anti-racist reading list like to life.
Right. Yeah, I don't think in the world of BookTube like buying books is considered too big of a sacrifice. It's like, we can have fun.
Right. So anyway, that's like, is there anything else you want to say about performative allyship or the reading list that we...
You know, I think it's what you're saying. We got to like get down to the reading of it. And I mean, yeah, I think listen more than talking.
Yes.
And reading is a fun kind of listening.
Yeah. I mean, many of the resources available to us have already been created by, you know, Black women and, you know, Black people. Like, they are there for the taking, I think. And so...
or buying from a Black bookstore.
And supporting, you know, and sharing what we've learned. And so I think that that's, you know, something we've all recognized we all can do. So now we just need to follow through.
Yeah. Also, you can, you know, request that your library order certain books if they don't have it.
That's true. Make some suggestions.
Pre-order things, yeah.
So yeah. So I know we didn't talk about any specific books today, but we'll get back to that maybe next time. But I just wanted to kind of get a little bit more real about the power of the reading list and the recommendations. So I guess that's it.
Thanks, Grace.